Hey, my nerds! So, magical healing of mental health isn't really something that we've seen done in fantasy. And it's certainly not something we've seen done very well all that often. So, for anyone out there who's interested in exploring the concept in their own writing, then listen up because I've got some tips to share with you. The inspiration for this video came because I watched a film recently that used the fixing of severe mental health conditions of several characters as a plot point. By using science, characters were cured instantly of their problems, and this hurt me to watch. I very recently lost a friend to suicide, a friend who had been battling her mental health issues for years, and for whom the fact that there was no cure for her led to her eventually committing suicide. It was very painful for me to watch this film use what she had been struggling with as a plot point, but mainly because they used it as an easy fix. The change the characters underwent was the equivalent of a blind person suddenly being able to see, but barely a word was mentioned about it. The implications weren't touched on because the characters undergoing the changes weren't relevant to the main arc of the story. Their mental health recovery could have been substituted with any other plotline, which means that the ramifications of what happened to those characters got ignored, rather than being explored like other shows have explored the mental health of characters really well in the past, like Jessica Jones. I remember watching this great scene from House years ago, where Wilson discovered that one of his terminal cancer patients didn't actually have cancer. So he, in a way, basically insta-cured the guy by telling him the truth. And the guy sued him for it. Not because Wilson got the diagnosis wrong, but because Wilson took the guy's cancer from him. His life had become about the disease. It became his identity, giving him the courage to do things in his final months that he wouldn't have otherwise had the courage to do. And he made a lot of very short-term decisions that now left him in a really sticky situation, since he was going to be around in the long term and had to deal with ramifications he didn't think he would have to deal with. So if you're going to go about healing your character's mental health, what considerations should you keep in mind? First up, what are the ramifications for the individuals that you've just insta-cured? How must they now adapt their life to this sudden change? The extent of how being insta-cured would affect your character would depend on a number of points. The primary factor being how long they were experiencing the mental health condition for and how much hope they had of ever being cured. You can have a character who is everything from resigned to their fate to determined to find a cure, and their reactions will be hugely different, especially when you factor in how long they've been trapped in that state for. We see this sort of cost in the real world when it comes to healing. Therapy can take years to do, and it can require dredging up so many traumas of your past. It's much like how there are costs for physically healing the body too. Organ transplants can leave you requiring immunosuppressants for the rest of your life that can increase your risk of getting other illnesses. These types of costs are sometimes forgotten about when it comes to healing in fantasy, whether that be physical or mental. But I would argue that the most interesting magic-based systems that are about healing actually take this cost into account. So when you think about cost, don't just ask yourself about what the cost is to your character, also think about what the cost is to the healer and potentially even the cost to society as a whole if you have a healthcare system in place in your world. Who pays for the extra healers you've got running around fixing the mental health concerns of your society? You've basically doubled the number of healers you're going to need. And just think about all of the different specialisms that will have arisen. Do you have healers who focus on different types of disorders? Or maybe they work according to the stage of life that the troubles arise from? Do you have potions to erase the memory of the trauma? Or do you fix someone's biochemistry in an amped up form of what we really do in our world with certain medications? Do you have all of your therapists also being telepaths, so they can be like Professor X and help people get through their issues? Telepaths would figure out what's going on with conditions like PTSD and anxiety a lot faster than it took medical professionals in our world. To that end, if you have a world where people are more aware of mental health, then you'll also need to consider how these societies are dealing with the prevention of mental health and the improved diagnosis of it. Do you have magical means of detecting changes to mental health? Perhaps magical creatures that can identify people who are depressed, even if they're high functioning and are able to hide how they're feeling. If you have an improved ability to detect mental health conditions, then you can reduce the rate of suicide in your society. But that's not all. By having better prevention and detection and treatment, you can create a society where the reduction of mental health problems has a knock-on effect on improving physical health conditions too, like how depression increases the chance of smoking, which increases the chance of a whole host of other diseases. You may find that by improving mental health in your society, you do a lot more than just improve people's mental well-being. Will you see a reduction in the incidence of domestic abuse and sexual abuse? Perhaps there will be fewer wars and power struggles because rulers aren't so desperate to prove themselves through the acquisition of power, and maybe people aren't driven by a need to secure themselves with more wealth just to negate long-lasting insecurities from their childhood. There are plenty of ways that better care for mental health can manifest in a healthier society, which is possibly why we don't see so many fantasy authors tackling it in their stories. Utopias remove a lot of the conflict that we authors thrive on in our books. I myself have far too many problems with my own psyche to go anywhere near a utopia, but maybe there's someone out there watching this who's in a more mentally healthy state and they can venture there instead. And with that unintended question of fantasy philosophy, I will wrap up for this week and wish you happy writing. Goodbye, my nerds!